You know, when we think about technology that changed the world, we usually think of the internet, or maybe the steam engine. But what if I told you the most important invention wasn't a clunky machine, but an idea? The idea of print. This isn't just a story about old books. It's about a single technology that literally rewired how we think, sparked revolutions, and built the very world we live in today.
No, really, just stop and think about it for a second. A world with no printed text at all. No street signs, no menus, no labels on anything. It's almost impossible to picture, isn't it? Well, for almost all of human history, that was just reality.
You see, before print, books were these incredible luxury items. Every single one had to be copied by hand, letter by a scribe. This made them unbelievably expensive, super fragile, and it took forever to make just one. Knowledge wasn't for everybody. It was a treasure, locked away and controlled by the very wealthy and powerful.
So where did this all start? Well, you might be surprised. The first spark of this incredible revolution didn't happen in Europe, like a lot of people think. To find the real beginning of our story, we've got to look east.
Yep, long before Gutenberg was even a thought, a really sophisticated system of hand printing was already going strong in China, Japan, and Korea. They had the two key ingredients that Europe wouldn't have for centuries: paper, which was a Chinese invention, and a brilliantly simple way to copy text and images over and over again.
And here's how they did it. It was genius in its simplicity. An artist would carve an entire page, text, pictures, everything, onto a single block of wood. Then they'd roll ink over the raised surface and press a sheet of paper against it. Simple, right? But for the first time ever, this meant you could make multiple identical copies of something. It was a game changer.
And check out all the different ways they used it. In China, the government used it to print tons of textbooks for their really tough civil service exams. Over in Japan, it gave us the world's oldest surviving printed book, the Buddhist Diamond Sutra. And fast forward to the 17th century, a new urban culture in China meant people were reading novels and plays just for fun. A whole new world of entertainment had opened up.
Of course, an idea this powerful wasn't going to stay in one place. Just like spices and silk, the knowledge of how to make paper and how to print with woodblocks traveled west along the famous Silk Road, and eventually it reached a Europe that was absolutely starving for information.
And this is where the story gets really dramatic. See, Europe had the basic idea, but it was hitting a wall. The demand for books was just exploding, but the old way of doing things just couldn't keep up. The stage was set for a massive innovation.
You had universities popping up, merchants needing to keep records, and just more and more people wanted to read. But copying by hand, it was a total dead end. It was slow, it was crazy expensive, and scribes made mistakes all the time. Europe desperately needed a faster, cheaper, and more reliable way to make books.
And this is where a German goldsmith named Johann Gutenberg steps onto the scene. Now, he didn't invent printing itself, but he perfected an absolutely revolutionary system using individual, movable metal letters. The difference was, well, it was everything. You went from slow, expensive, error-filled copies to mass production that was lightning fast, way cheaper, and perfectly consistent every single time.
To put that into perspective for you, a single Gutenberg press could print 250 sheets on one side in just 1 hour. What might take a scribe months to copy by hand, the press could crank out in a single day. And the first big book they printed with this new tech? The Bible, of course.
The result was just staggering. In the first 50 years after Gutenberg's invention, something like 20 million books flooded the European market. A century later, that number shot up by 10 times to 200 million. This wasn't just a small change. This was an information big bang.
But this was never just about making more books. It was about what those books did. They completely changed our relationship with information, with power, and with each other. This was the beginning of a real revolution.
And you know who understood this power right away? Religious reformers. Martin Luther, for instance, he saw the printing press as a tool from God. When he wrote his 95 Theses criticizing the Catholic Church, print meant his ideas could be copied and spread all across Germany in just a few weeks. It's what ignited the Protestant Reformation.
So right away, you have this massive conflict. For people like Luther, print was a weapon of liberation. But for the people in charge, the church, the kings, it was terrifying. They were afraid that if anyone could print and read anything they wanted, it would lead to rebellion, to heresy, to the total collapse of society. And what do you do when you're afraid of an idea? You try to ban it.
The Roman Church created the Index of Prohibited Books, which was basically a huge list of books that good Catholics were forbidden from reading. It was one of the first big attempts at mass censorship, and it was a direct reaction to the power of the press.
Now, fast forward a couple hundred years, and this same dynamic just explodes into politics, helping to fuel the French Revolution. Radical new ideas from thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau, who argued for reason over tradition, spread like wildfire. A new public culture was born where ordinary people were debating everything, and at the same time, cheap little pamphlets and cartoons were being passed around that openly mocked the king and queen, tearing down their authority.
Okay, so this revolution started in Europe, but it was always destined to go global. The printing press became this key tool for trade, for religion, and for empire, and it started spreading all across the world.
Let's just take India as an example. The very first press arrived there with Portuguese missionaries back in the mid-16th century, and they started printing religious texts in local languages like Tamil and Malayalam to spread their message. But by the late 18th century, you start to see English newspapers. And pretty soon after that, Indian-owned papers, which would become these incredibly important voices in the fight for independence.
So when you look back at this entire story, from its beginnings in the East to its explosion in Europe and its spread across the globe, it's impossible not to hear some powerful echoes in our own time. Just think about it for a second. A new technology comes along. It makes it dramatically cheaper and easier to share information. It allows new, sometimes radical ideas to spread way outside of official channels. It challenges the power of the old institutions. Are we talking about the printing press, or are we talking about the internet?
The truth is, the fundamental shifts we are all living through right now, this democratization of knowledge, the huge battles over truth and misinformation, the incredible power of online social movements, all of it has its roots in that very first information revolution. The printing press created the idea of a public, and we are still dealing with its legacy today.
Which really just leaves us with one final, huge question. The print revolution gave us the Reformation, the Enlightenment, and the modern world as we know it. So looking at our own chaotic, hyper-connected digital age, what will our information revolution be remembered for?